Emma's sobs filled the kitchen after I told her I was done. I expected her to plead, to break down and beg for another chance. But what followed caught me off guard. Her tears stopped almost abruptly. She wiped her face, took a deep breath, and looked at me with an expression that I couldn't quite place, somewhere between resignation and defiance. "So, that's it," she said flatly. Her tone stunned me. I blinked, trying to process her sudden shift in demeanor. "What do you mean, that's it?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. She shrugged, leaning back against the counter. "You've already decided, haven't you? There's no point in me trying to explain or fix things if you've made up your mind." "Explain?" I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "You've had every chance to explain, Emma. But every time I've asked for the truth, you've lied. And now you're acting like I'm the problem because I can't just forgive you for sleeping with another man." Her eyes narrowed. "I told you it was a mistake. I've apologized. What else do you want from me, Steve? To grovel? To hate myself forever?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I want you to take responsibility," I said, my voice shaking. "I want you to acknowledge what you've done instead of brushing it off like it's no big deal. You didn't just hurt me, Emma, you hurt Jake too. He saw the video. Do you even realize what that's done to him?" Her expression faltered for a moment, but then she straightened up, crossing her arms defensively. "He's a kid," she said dismissively. "He doesn't understand. We'll explain it to him, and he'll get over it." My jaw dropped. "Are you even hearing yourself right now? You're talking about this like it's a bad grade or a cancelled soccer game. This is his family, Emma, his whole world. And you've torn it apart." She sighed heavily, as if she were the one who was exhausted by this conversation. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, her voice cold. "But I can't change what happened. What do you want me to do, Steve? Go back in time and undo it?" For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something inside me snap. Her indifference wasn't just painful, it was infuriating. "You don't care, do you?" I said, my voice low and icy. "You don't care about me, about Jake, about what you've done to this family. You only care about yourself." Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she just shook her head. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "Fair?" I laughed bitterly. "You're lecturing me about fairness? After everything you've done?" She looked away, her arms still crossed, her jaw clenched. Her silence spoke volumes. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for something, anything, that might resemble remorse. But it never came. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even try to defend herself. She just stood there, like she was waiting for this whole conversation to end so she could move on with her life. It was in that moment that I realized just how far apart we'd grown. This wasn't the woman I married. The Emma I fell in love with would have been devastated by the thought of losing her family. She would have fought for us, for Jake, for the life we'd built together. But this Emma? She was a stranger. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room," I said finally, my voice hollow. "And as far as I'm concerned, we're done." I turned to leave, but she called after me. "Steve." I stopped but didn't turn around. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice softer now, "I am sorry. I never wanted it to end like this." I didn't respond. Her apology, if that's what it even was, felt too little, too late. That night, as I lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about her reaction. The lack of emotion, the refusal to take accountability, it was like seeing a mask I didn't know she wore slip off for the first time. Jake came to the door a little after 10 p.m., knocking softly. "Come in," I said, sitting up. He walked in slowly, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, something he hadn't done in years. He looked so small, so unsure, and it broke my heart. "Dad," he said hesitantly. "Are you mad at Mom?" I sighed, patting the bed next to me. "Come here, bud." He climbed up and sat next to me, his little legs dangling off the edge. "Sometimes," I began carefully, "grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. And when that happens, it can make things hard for a family. But I want you to know something, okay?" He nodded, his wide eyes searching mine. "No matter what happens between me and Mom, I will always love you," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're the most important thing in my life, Jake. Don't ever forget that." He hugged me tightly, and for the first time in days, I felt a small sliver of comfort. After he went back to bed, I lay awake, thinking about what to do next. It was clear to me now that this marriage wasn't salvageable. Emma's indifference, her lack of remorse, it was a nail in the coffin. But what hurt the most wasn't losing her. It was the thought of what this would do to Jake. The days that followed were a blur of strained silence and barely concealed tension. Emma and I avoided each other as much as possible, speaking only when necessary and keeping conversations short. Jake, perceptive as ever, began to sense that something wasn't right. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. One evening, as I was helping Jake with his homework, he put down his pencil and looked up at me with wide, worried eyes. "Dad," he began cautiously, "is something wrong with you and Mom?" My chest tightened. I'd been dreading this moment, but I knew I couldn't keep brushing him off. Jake deserved honesty, even if it was simplified for his young mind. I set down the homework sheet and took a deep breath. "Why do you ask, buddy?" He hesitated, fidgeting with the edge of his notebook. "You're sleeping in the guest room. And you and Mom don't talk much anymore. Did I do something wrong?" The heartbreak in his voice was like a knife to my chest. I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. "No, Jake. You didn't do anything wrong. This has nothing to do with you, I promise." He looked at me, his small face scrunched in confusion. "Then why are you and Mom so upset?" How could I explain something so complicated to a 10-year-old? How could I tell him that his mother had betrayed our family without shattering his world? "It's complicated," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, grown-ups have problems they don't know how to fix. And when that happens, it can make things hard at home. But I want you to know something really important, Jake. None of this is your fault, okay? Mom and I both love you more than anything." He nodded slowly, but his expression didn't change. "Are you going to leave?" His question hit me like a ton of bricks. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as he buried his face in my chest. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "I'll always be here for you. No matter what." As I held him, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger toward Emma. She'd made choices that had led us to this point, and now Jake was caught in the crossfire. He didn't deserve this. Later that night, Jake's heartbreak took an even more painful turn. I heard him crying softly in his room and went to check on him. When I walked in, he was curled up in bed, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Jake?" I said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed. He wiped his eyes quickly, trying to act like nothing was wrong. "I'm fine," he mumbled. "You don't have to be fine," I said, placing a hand on his back. "It's okay to feel sad or confused. I feel that way too sometimes." He sniffled, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "I just don't understand why Mom is being so mean to you." The words stopped me cold. "What do you mean, buddy?" "She's always yelling at you," he said, his voice trembling. "And she doesn't talk to me much anymore either. She's always on her phone or in her room. It's like she doesn't care about us anymore." Hearing those words from my son broke something inside me. I knew Emma's behavior had changed, but I hadn't realized how much it was affecting Jake. "She does care about you," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. She's just going through a tough time right now. But you're not alone, Jake. You've got me, and I'll always be here for you. He nodded, though his tears didn't stop. I wish things could go back to the way they were, he said softly. I stayed with him until he fell asleep, my heart heavy with guilt and anger. Jake was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he was old enough to feel the distance growing between us. The next morning, Emma and I crossed paths in the kitchen. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from what I assumed was another night of crying. "Jake's struggling," I said bluntly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. She looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "He's confused. Hurt. He doesn't understand why you're so distant, and he's starting to feel like you don't care about him." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine remorse in her expression. "I never meant to hurt him," she said quietly. "Intentions don't matter," I said sharply. "What matters is what he's feeling. And right now, he feels like he's losing his mom." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, looking lost and overwhelmed. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, and the video, the choices she'd made that had led us here. And whatever sympathy I might have felt was swallowed by the lingering anger in my chest. Jake deserved better. We both did. Over the next few days, Emma began to change. At first, it was subtle, small attempts to reconnect with Jake and me. She started making dinner instead of ordering takeout, asked Jake about school, and tried to join him when he played video games. But it was clear she wasn't getting the response she'd hoped for. Jake was polite but distant, giving her short answers or shrugging off her attempts to join in. He wasn't openly hostile, he was too young for that, but the coldness was there. And the more Jake pulled away, the more I saw the cracks in Emma's armor. One evening, I found her sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. She didn't even notice when I walked in. "Emma?" I said hesitantly. She turned to me, her eyes tired and red. "Do you think Jake hates me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I sat down in the chair across from her and said, "He doesn't hate you. He's hurt. He doesn't understand why things are so different." She nodded slowly, looking down at her hands. "I've messed everything up, haven't I? I didn't sugarcoat it. You've made choices that hurt this family. And now we're all trying to figure out how to move forward." Her lip trembled, and she pressed her fingers to her temples. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by being honest," I said. "With me, with Jake, with yourself. If you keep pretending everything's fine, it's only going to get worse." She nodded again, though she didn't say anything more. The next day, Emma made her first real attempt to mend things with Jake. She picked him up from school early and took him to the park, just the two of them. When they came home, Jake seemed happier, more relaxed. But later that night, he came to me with a question that shook me to my core. "Dad," he said, standing in the doorway of my room, "why does Mom say she misses me? She's here all the time." I paused, unsure how to answer. "What do you mean?" "She said today that she misses how close we used to be," he explained. "But I don't get it. She's the one who stopped talking to me, not the other way around." The simplicity of his words cut deep. Jake wasn't trying to be cruel, he was just stating a fact. But it underscored the damage Emma's actions had caused. I knelt down so I was at his eye level. "Sometimes grown-ups get so caught up in their own problems that they forget to show the people they love how much they care," I said. "It's not fair, and it's not right. But it doesn't mean your mom doesn't love you. She's just trying to figure out how to show it again." Jake nodded, though he still looked uncertain. Do you think things will ever go back to normal? I hesitated. I don't know, buddy. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. That's never going to change. The conversation stayed with me long after Jake went to bed. I couldn't stop thinking about how much this situation had affected him. Emma's attempts to reconnect were a start, but it was clear she had a long way to go. A few days later, she came to me with a proposal. I want to move out for a while, she said, her voice shaky. I blinked, taken aback. What? I think Jake and I both need some space, she continued. I can tell he's struggling with me being here, and I don't want to make things harder for him. Maybe if I give him some time, he'll come around. I studied her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. She looked vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in years, like she was finally starting to grasp the weight of what she'd done. Do you really think leaving is the answer? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. But I feel like I'm suffocating here. Every time I look at you or Jake, I see how much I've hurt you. And it's killing me. Her words struck a chord, though I wasn't sure if it was sympathy or frustration. If that's what you think is best, I said carefully, then do it. But don't use this as an excuse to run away from your problems. If you leave, you'd better come back ready to face the consequences of your actions. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I'm not running, she said. I need to figure out who I am and how to fix this. Over the next few days, Emma packed up some of her things and moved into a friend's spare room. Jake didn't say much when we told him, but I could see the mix of confusion and relief in his eyes. The house felt emptier without her, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. And as Jake and I settled into a new routine, I realized that this might be the start of something better, for both of us. The first week after Emma moved out was strange, to say the least. The house felt quieter without her, and for a while, I wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. On one hand, it was a relief not to have the tension hanging over us every moment. On the other, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of a life I'd spent over a decade building. Jake adjusted faster than I did. Kids are resilient like that. He asked about Emma a few times, where she was staying, if she was okay, but he didn't seem overly upset by her absence. If anything, he seemed more at ease, like a weight had been lifted from his small shoulders. She's staying with a friend for a little while, I told him one evening as we ate dinner. She just needs some time to figure things out. Is she coming back? He asked, poking at his mashed potatoes with his fork. I don't know, buddy, I admitted. But no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. You and me, we're a team, right? He smiled faintly and nodded. Yeah. A team. It became our mantra over the next few days. Whenever things felt too heavy or uncertain, I'd remind him, and myself, that we were a team, and we'd get through this together. Meanwhile, Emma's absence didn't go unnoticed by the outside world. Word spread quickly among our friends and neighbors that something was going on, and it wasn't long before the questions started rolling in. Is everything okay between you and Emma? A neighbor asked casually one afternoon as I was mowing the lawn. Yeah, we're just working through some stuff, I replied, keeping it vague. The truth was, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. But that didn't stop the whispers or the sideways glances. People love a bit of drama, and our situation seemed to be the talk of the neighborhood. What surprised me most, though, was how quickly Emma's friends began to turn on her. I hadn't spoken to Lisa or the others since everything came to light, but one evening, I got a call from Kelly, the same Kelly who'd been at the lake house. I don't know if I should be calling you, she said hesitantly. But I need to tell you something. I gripped the phone tightly, my stomach knotting. What is it? Emma's mad at all of us, she said. She's blaming us for everything. She says we should have been more careful about what we posted, that it's our fault Jake saw the video. I clenched my jaw, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Are you kidding me? She's blaming you for her own choices. Kelly sighed. Look, Steve, I didn't call to defend her. I just wanted you to know that we didn't mean for any of this to happen. We didn't know about Ben until we got to the lake house, and by then, it was complicated. I'm sorry you and Jake got dragged into this. Her words did little to ease my frustration, but I appreciated her honesty. Thanks for telling me, I said. It's good to know where I stand. After the call, I couldn't stop thinking about how Emma was handling things, or rather, how she wasn't. Instead of owning up to her actions, she was lashing out at the very people who had been there for her. It was a pattern I was beginning to recognize all too well. Jake, meanwhile, continued to distance himself from her. Emma called every couple of days to check in, but their conversations were brief and strained. Did you talk to Mom? I asked one evening after he hung up the phone. Yeah, he said, shrugging. How was it? He hesitated, then looked up at me with a frown. She just keeps saying she's sorry, but it doesn't feel real, you know. Like, if she was really sorry, she wouldn't have done it in the first place. Hearing those words from my 10-year-old son broke my heart all over again. He was too young to be dealing with this kind of pain, but there was nothing I could do to shield him from it now. You're allowed to feel however you feel, I told him. It's okay to be mad or sad or confused. But remember, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one day at a time. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Do you think she misses us? I paused, unsure how to answer. I think she's trying to figure out what's important to her, I said finally. But I know one thing for sure, you're the most important thing in my life, Jake. And that's never going to change. That night, after Jake went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space where Emma's favorite chair used to be. The house felt emptier than ever, but for the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. Emma had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. I couldn't control what she did or how she felt, but I could control how I moved forward, for Jake and for myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to rebuild the life she'd torn apart. And if that meant leaving her behind, so be it. It had been 2 weeks since Emma moved out, and in that time, the atmosphere at home had shifted. Jake seemed lighter, more like his old self, and while I was still grappling with the weight of it all, I felt steadier with each passing day. But Emma hadn't disappeared entirely. True to her word, she began reaching out more, trying to reconnect with both Jake and me. Her texts to me were infrequent but pointed, filled with apologies and promises that felt both desperate and hollow. One evening, while Jake was upstairs, she called. I debated whether to answer but decided it was better to face her than keep dodging the inevitable. Hi, Steve, she said when I picked up. Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile. What is it, Emma? I asked, keeping my tone even. I wanted to talk about Jake, she said quickly, as though rushing to get the words out. I know he's been pulling away from me, and I don't blame him. But I don't know how to fix it. Every time I call, he barely talks to me. He doesn't even want to see me. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. You hurt him, Emma. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. He needs time to process everything. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But I don't want to lose him. He's my son, Steve. I love him so much. If you want to fix things with Jake, it's going to take more than just words, I said. You need to show him that you're willing to change, that you're putting in the effort to be the mom he needs. How? She asked, desperation creeping into her tone. That's something you'll have to figure out, I said bluntly. Jake is a smart kid. He knows when people are being genuine. If you want to rebuild that connection, you have to be honest with him and with yourself. The line went silent for a moment. Then she said, do you think I've lost him for good? Her question caught me off guard. For a moment, I heard something in her voice that sounded like real regret. "I don't know, Emma," I said honestly. "But if you don't take this seriously, you might." The next weekend, Emma asked if she could take Jake out for the day. I left the decision up to him, and to my surprise, he agreed. When she arrived to pick him up, she looked nervous, standing awkwardly in the doorway as Jake got his shoes on. "Hi," she said softly, glancing at me. I nodded but didn't say much. This wasn't about us, it was about her relationship with Jake. As they drove away, I couldn't help but wonder how the day would go. Would Jake open up to her? Would she find a way to show him she cared? Or would this be just another surface-level attempt to patch things up? When they came back that evening, Jake seemed content. Not overly excited, but not withdrawn either. I took it as a good sign. "How was it?" I asked him later, once Emma had left. "It was okay," he said with a shrug. "She didn't talk about the bad stuff. We just got ice cream and played mini-golf." "Did you have fun?" I asked. "Yeah," he admitted, a small smile creeping onto his face. "It was kind of nice." I nodded, relieved to see even the smallest hint of progress. Over the next few weeks, Emma kept trying. She showed up for Jake's soccer games, helped him with his homework over video calls, and even started sending him little notes and snacks in his lunchbox. At first, Jake was wary, but gradually, he began to let his guard down. He laughed at her jokes again, asked her about her day, and even invited her to one of his soccer practices. But while she was making strides with Jake, things between Emma and me remained strained. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells, and while I appreciated her efforts to repair her relationship with our son, I couldn't ignore the damage she'd done to ours. One evening, after Jake had gone to bed, Emma called again. "Steve," she began hesitantly, "I know I don't deserve another chance. But I want to try. For Jake. For us." Her words hit me like a freight train. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow piece our family back together. But the other part of me, the part that remembered the texts, the videos, and the betrayal, knew better. "I don't think that's possible," I said quietly. "Why not?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We've been through so much together. Can't we at least try to move past this?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "Emma, I gave you everything I had. I trusted you, and you broke that trust in a way I can't forget. This isn't just about me, it's about Jake too. I can't put him through more turmoil just to see if we can make this work." She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "So, this is it. We're really over." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to say the words I'd been avoiding for weeks. "Yeah. We are." There was a muffled sob on the other end of the line, and then she hung up. As I sat there in the silence, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a sense of finality. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking a step in the right direction. The weeks following my conversation with Emma were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. There was a quiet finality to it all now, something that hung in the air between me and the life we'd once shared. Every time I looked at Jake, I was reminded that we weren't just moving forward, we were rebuilding from the ground up. I kept my promises to Jake, being there for him, supporting him, and giving him all the love and attention he needed. I wanted to give him a sense of stability and security in a world that had suddenly felt unstable. It was the least I could do, considering everything he'd been through. But, as much as I focused on Jake, I couldn't avoid the reality of our situation. Emma was still trying to maintain a relationship with him, and while I admired her efforts, I wasn't sure how long it would take for things to truly heal. She was a presence in his life again, but things were forever different. I had to accept that there was no going back to what we once had, and the future we envisioned together was lost. One afternoon, after an uneventful day at school, Jake and I were in the kitchen making sandwiches. I noticed he was unusually quiet, and his gaze seemed far away, like he was lost in thought. "Everything okay, bud?" I asked, setting down the knife. He shrugged, his eyes still distant. "I don't know, Dad. I guess I'm just confused." "Confused about what?" I asked, sitting down at the kitchen table. He hesitated, then looked up at me. "It's just, Mom. I want her to be happy, but it's hard. I'm happy when I'm with you, but I don't know if I can ever be like I was with her." My heart ached for him. "It's okay to feel that way, Jake. You don't have to have all the answers. But you're not alone in this. I'll be here for you, and we'll figure this out together." He nodded, though his expression remained heavy. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the emotional weight he was still carrying. It was clear that the fallout of Emma's actions had taken its toll on him, and it would take time for him to fully process what had happened. Later that evening, as Jake and I sat down to watch one of his favorite shows, I saw the notifications flashing on my phone. I wasn't in the mood to deal with anything, but I picked it up out of habit. There was a message from Emma. "Steve, can we talk? I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to try and make things right. For Jake. For us." The message hit me harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to tell her I was sorry for everything that had happened, but the other part of me knew that those words wouldn't fix what she had broken. But I couldn't ignore her request. I had tried to shut her out, but for Jake's sake, we couldn't keep avoiding each other. We had a responsibility to co-parent, to make sure Jake didn't get caught in the middle of our mess. I took a deep breath and typed out a response. "Fine. We can talk. But I'm not making any promises." Her reply came quickly. "Thank you, Steve. I know I've hurt you, and I don't deserve anything from you. But I want to try. For Jake." The words felt like both a plea and a final attempt at redemption. I couldn't promise anything, but I owed it to Jake, and to myself, to have this conversation. The next afternoon, Emma came to the house. She looked different, more tired, more fragile, but there was something about her that seemed more genuine than I had seen in a long time. When she walked into the living room, she paused, waiting for me to say something. "Sit down," I said, motioning toward the couch. She hesitated, then slowly sat down. "I don't expect things to go back to the way they were," she began, her voice softer than I remembered. "But I want to at least. I don't know, start over. I want to be a better person. A better mother. I can't take back what I did, but I need to show you that I'm trying." I took a moment to let her words sink in. My anger from before hadn't completely faded, but there was a flicker of something else now, something like hope, buried deep beneath the hurt. Could people really change? Could she become the person I needed her to be, even after everything she'd done? "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she continued, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I just need you to know that I'm sorry. And I want to make things right with Jake. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her for a long time, weighing her words against the past. Then I nodded slowly. "It's going to take a long time, Emma. A lot of time. But if you're serious about this, I'll give you a chance. For Jake's sake, and for yours." Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down." After she left, I sat in the silence of the house, reflecting on what had just happened. It wasn't a resolution, not yet. But it was a step, a small step, toward healing. For Emma, for Jake, and for me. That evening, Jake came downstairs to find me in the living room, staring out the window. "Dad?" he asked hesitantly. I turned to face him, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Hey, bud. "I'm glad you talked to Mom," he said softly. "Do you think she's really sorry?" "I think she's trying," I said. "And that's all we can ask for right now." He nodded, seeming to accept that. "Do you think things will be okay?" "I don't know, Jake. But we're going to be okay. We're a team, remember?" He smiled and nodded. "Yeah, we are." As I watched him go back to his room, I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't perfect, and I knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. But we had taken the first steps toward something new. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed in just a few months. What started as a comfortable, if monotonous, existence turned into something I never saw coming, a storm of betrayal, heartbreak, and uncertainty. But as painful as the journey has been, I've come to realize that sometimes life has a way of tearing you apart so you can rebuild stronger. Emma and I are no longer together in the way we once were, and I've accepted that we never will be. While she's made strides in repairing her relationship with Jake, the trust between us is beyond repair. I've finally stopped trying to force something that no longer fits, and in doing so, I've found a surprising sense of peace. Jake, for his part, has adapted better than I could have hoped. He still struggles sometimes, but I see glimpses of the carefree, happy kid he used to be. He's learning that families don't have to look a certain way to be filled with love and stability. And I've done everything I can to show him that he's never alone. As for Emma, she's still finding her way. She's taken accountability for her actions, and I can tell she's genuinely trying to change. But change doesn't erase the past, and it doesn't mean reconciliation is inevitable. I wish her the best, for Jake's sake and for hers, but I've finally let go of the idea that we're meant to be together. Surprisingly, life has started to open new doors for me. A few weeks ago, I attended Jake's parent-teacher conference, where I met Ms. Daniels, his teacher. She's young, kind, and incredibly understanding of everything Jake's been through. We've struck up a few conversations since then, and while it's too early to say where things might go, I can't deny the glimmer of hope I feel when I think about her. It's strange to think about starting over, especially after spending more than a decade with someone I thought I'd be with forever. But starting over doesn't feel as scary as it used to. It feels freeing, like a chance to redefine who I am and what I want. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that people are complicated. We're flawed, we make mistakes, and sometimes we hurt the people we love most. But those mistakes don't have to define us. They can be an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to move forward with more clarity and purpose. For anyone out there who's going through something similar, my advice is this: don't lose yourself trying to fix someone else's mistakes. It's okay to grieve, to feel angry, and to take the time you need to heal. But don't let the pain keep you from moving forward. You deserve happiness, even if it looks different from what you imagined. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful in its own way. As Jake and I sit on the couch tonight, watching one of his favorite movies and laughing at all the silly parts, I realize just how much I have to be grateful for. My family might look different now, but it's still filled with love, resilience, and hope. And as I glance over at Jake, my teammate through it all, I know one thing for sure: we're going to be just fine.